Welcome everyone to Bridging the Gap, and my name is Garrett Sales, and today I want to talk to you about rejection of the church. But before I just get into it, here's some words from my pastor, Dwayne Hunt, on rejection of the church.
Sad to say that even after 160 years, Christianity and the Bible are still being used to prop up systemic racism. And this has actually caused a new generation of blacks to reject the church and the scripture. I can't count how many times I've heard it said that the Bible is a white man's book. Well, that is so not true, because the Bible is a book of color.
If you're interested in more of what you just saw, make sure you visit Abundant Grace Fellowship on Facebook and on YouTube. And also a quick disclaimer, even though this video mentioned the black church, I don't want you to think that this group is just for black people. This is for all of us. One thing that I always ran across was when people felt like Christians were cannibals because, when Jesus was talking at the Last Supper, he said to eat my body and drink my blood. And people think that that means that Christians are cannibals because we literally eat his body and drink his blood, when clearly Jesus was giving symbolism. As a matter of fact, I want my pastor to come and explain what Jesus actually meant and what really was talked about during when he said that. Watch this.
When Jesus invites us to come and dine, he offers himself as the meal. In John 7:37, it speaks of the last day of the great feast. And it says that Jesus actually stood up in the midst of the crowd and he began shouting, "If anyone's thirsty, come to me and drink." And he's not just drink, he's also the food. In John 6:35, Jesus also said, "I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." Then Jesus makes this provocative statement. He says, "The bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. And whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him." Now, the disciples were perplexed by Jesus' statement, and they actually said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept this?" Now, that statement has lost its shock value to us, because whenever we hear that, eating his flesh and drinking his blood, we actually interpret it through the lens of communion or the Eucharist. And we simply reduce it to bread and wine. But it's so much more. When Jesus said, "My flesh is true food and my blood is true drink," he was talking to a people who understood sacrifices and offerings. That animal sacrifice was like offering food to God. And so whenever a person would come to offer their sacrifice, they would first bring their best animal, and then they would place their hands on that animal. And the laying hands on that animal caused that sacrifice to represent them. And giving that animal, they were actually giving themselves to God. And because we're talking about a burnt offering, it means that the offering was killed and it was totally consumed. And that total consumption represents the giving the whole of yourself to God, withholding nothing.
I really hope watching that video gave you a lot of clarity on what Jesus really meant during the Last Supper. So the question for the week is this: what are some common misconceptions that you've heard about the church that you know aren't true?